Hello, everyone, and welcome to day two of the Ascender Customer Connect. Now, we hope you have been enjoying the sessions so far. It would have been more ideal if we could gather together as we did, but who would have known that COVID-19 would struck us, and it has absolutely changed the way we live and the way workplaces are. Now, on this topic, as we are doing right now, working remotely and working from home, which is really the new normal, I'm sure you have read many articles about how businesses and HR must have a paradigm shift in order to retain your people. With that, the concept of employee engagement has never been so pertinent as today. But still, as many HR leaders strive to get their projects ahead, many still struggle to articulate the need for keeping employees engaged and the value it would bring to the business. So in the next 30 minutes, we aim to equip you with the right skills to get your HR objectives over the line. Now, just a quick introduction of the speakers for today. We have Ina, the General Manager of Ascender Asia, who will share with us insights on how HR can partner with the business and play a strategic role in helping the business achieve its objectives. Ina, do you want to say a few words?
Thanks, Donovan. Hey, everyone, it's great to be here. I'll be sure to hold the flag high from a business point of view and represent the view from a business in this conversation.
Thanks, Ina. And I'm Donovan, and I manage the human capital management business in Asia, and both of us, we are based in Singapore. All right, and to the agenda for today, we will cover, number one, why do we fail in getting our plans approved? And therefore, that explains that there is a need to understand the economics of human capital management. Number two, what do our colleagues in the boardroom, basically our C-level leaders, care about? In other words, our stakeholders. And for this segment, we will have Ina, the GM of Ascender Asia, to share with us more on the insights of how she manages the business and how HR partners with her to achieve those objectives. And lastly, we will cover how a very simple methodology that we highly advocate that you can use to start building your business case. And of course, we'll spend the next 5 to 10 minutes having an open Q&A. All right, let's begin by understanding the dichotomy between the HR business and the business as a whole through understanding the economics of human capital management. Did you know, or maybe we have already known, that 80 to 90% of HR projects fail to get approved? Now, every business has a budget, and something has to be spent somewhere, especially in this era of digital transformation. Budgets are often spent on IT to improve data security, which is imperative to business stability. Budgets are also spent on things like marketing and sales to increase leads and customer conversions. Obviously, they are also important. What we often hear is that there is spare budget, then it goes to HR. Essentially, it sounds like HR is always the bottom of the list of priority. Now, why is that so? Based on our research, we find that there are two lacking elements. Number one, the lack of issue data and the lack of the ROI data, in essence, the return of investment. And number two is a lack of understanding of business challenges and the lack of understanding of the business strategy. And because of this, there is no funding, there is no budget, or in some cases, the projects get deferred year after year. And at the end of the day, it never gets approved. What that essentially means is understanding what the CEO, the board, the shareholders care about. Essentially, again, that's the second segment of our session today. Now, in Business 101, there are really two things fundamentally on the minds of business leaders. Number one, increasing revenue and profits, obviously. And number two, in a situation like that, businesses are striving to decrease operating costs. Now, if HR can understand and internalize these two key items, then that will help HR leaders to better articulate the value of the HR project and how it will align with the business strategy. With this, let us take a look at how the employee life cycle impacts profitability and costs. This chart shows you the typical employee life cycle, which is the x-axis, and the financial impact it has at each stage, which is the y-axis. Now, what you would see are the typical few phases of the employee life cycle, such as the hiring stage, the onboarding stage, and things like performance management that will help the employee to ramp up and developing its effectiveness in the role and growing to productivity, eventually breaking even and reaping its benefits to the business. Now, the illustration that you see here is a negative one, which is an example of when a new hire joins a company and leaves within a year. We call it early attrition. Now, every new hire obviously starts as a negative cost to the business. You would see at the beginning of the chart. And it typically takes 6 to 9 months for a new hire to start to be productive, which means any new hire that exits the business is cost that will never ever be recuperated. And then additional resources is pumped into hiring and retraining and their ramp up time to break even. If nothing is done, then it becomes a vicious cycle that it's already costing the business tons of money. Statistics tells us that the cost of attrition is approximately 50 to 250% of the annual salary plus the benefits of an employee, depending on the level of seniority. Which means, to give you an example, if an employee earns about 100 grand in his or her annual package, it will cost the business about 150 grand to replace. And that is not considering the loss of salary if it's due to early attrition, anything less than 6 months. Because if it is, that essentially is 200 grand. If you do a quick simple math, it's 150 grand plus another 50 grand based again on 100 grand annual package. Now, for today, let us take a look at some statistics by Aon Hewitt on the level of engagement in Asia. Now, what you're seeing on the screen is this survey was done in 2018, and it shows that Singapore has the lowest level of engagement at 59%. Now, that's low. For today's context and with the limited time that we have, we will dive into the current state in Singapore. What you will see next is a recent article published by the Straits Times in February this year. Now, the report scored that the engagement level in Singapore is at 47% in 2020. What that tells us is this is a declining trend from 59% in 2018 and 47% in 2020. And the outcome of that? It reports that 20% of workers plan to leave their jobs in less than a year. Now, that's the example that we just went through about early attrition, about what we spoke about costs that will never be recuperated. It also reports that the top drivers of employee engagement in Singapore were a link between work and organization objectives. We call that alignment, trust in leadership, career progression, and recognition. In short, boosting engagement can reduce churn. Now, let us then take a look at a positive illustration of an employee life cycle that drives positive business outcomes. Now, the difference between the previous chart that you have seen and the current chart that you see on the screen right now, it's how a new hire has a break even. We see that the effective time to productivity was shortened from 18 months to 9 months. And you see that the line, orange line, in turn becomes blue. Now, when there is engagement, it reduces churn and it helps the business to break even and reap its ROI quicker. We essentially call this the S-curve. For HR, there are two things we can do. There are many, but just for today's session, we'll cover two things. What you can do, number one, to help the business reap its benefits quickly is to shorten the time to productivity. We call that ramp up, which means if it typically takes about 18 months for an employee to break even, what you can strive to do is to shorten that period from 18 months to 9 months. By doing so, you can help the business save costs and reap profits as quickly as possible. Number two, which is to increase the level of performance, which means more sales, better alignment to business goals, etc. and etc. Now, we spoke a little bit about alignment earlier, and so therefore it is critical for HR to understand their stakeholders and what they care about, because by doing so, it will increase your chances of getting your business case approved. So for this segment, let us hear from Ina, who manages the P&L for Ascender in Asia, which will therefore cover 3 questions. Now, so Ina, for the first question, what are the top 3 things you care about for your business, if you could share with us?
Well, thanks, Donovan. I think everyone fully expects me to say this, and I will. The things that I care about are money, money, and money. So let me just break that down a little bit, just to not sound fully so greedy. The first element that I'd like to talk about is profitable growth. So we've been in the business here in sort of Asia Pacific for a good 40 years already, and I fully intend to keep it that way, which is why I'm inclined to favor profitable growth. So we're not a startup. We need to grow as an organization. We need to demonstrate to our shareholders, stakeholders, that we want to keep growing and that we're an ambitious business, but we also need to make sure that we do that with a good sense of sort of profitability rather than sort of running on vapor or buying clients, etc. So in order to achieve that, is obviously really important that I have the right team in place. And then if I talk about the second thing that I care about in the context of, I guess, money, 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 then productivity is another driver. So what I need to do as a sort of leader in business is to make sure that my team is as productive as they can be. I need to ensure that they've got the right tools in place to perform to their optimum level, and that they've got the right incentive models in place to do that, and also that we have sort of good alignment between what the company wants to achieve and what these individuals want to achieve. So, good alignment between their personal goals, their drivers, and the business goals. And that productivity will then help me obviously reach that profitable growth ultimately. And then finally, as part of the sort of third aspect that we're looking at keenly, client satisfaction is a key driver for me as well. And at Ascender, we believe very strongly that we can't have happy clients unless we have happy employees, which is why the role of HR and the way HR supports me is really critical. So I think it's been well established in lots of studies around the world as well, that the fact, that the more engaged and satisfied and happy and aligned your employees are basically with what the company is, the company values align with their personal values, etc., the more they provide better service to the clients, and the more I therefore can obviously sell ultimately to these clients, etc. So I think overall these would be the top three areas that I would focus on as a business leader today.
Yeah. Thanks, Ina. Well, I think this is really similar to a lot of business leaders out there. Essentially, really, if you have good employees, but there is no profitable growth and no clients are satisfied with your products or services, essentially, the business doesn't grow, right? Which leads us to the next question, Ina. So with those key objectives you have shared, how does HR partner with you to help you achieve them?
Look, one of my pet peeves is when people say that HR should be responsible for the people objectives, and I feel very strongly about the fact that HR is not in place in order to help me reach my people objectives. It is my team, it is my business, it is my company, if you will, and therefore HR really is, and I know HR people don't necessarily always like it, but it is a support function, but it's a really important one. So they really shouldn't be driving those people objectives. But on the other hand, I really need HR to provide the framework, the process, and the tools for me to be able to do my best job with those people. So I need standards, I need guidelines, I need direction, and I need a little bit of prodding every now and then as well. But I think ultimately people leave bad managers, as you know, they don't leave bad HR necessarily. So I think we should all keep that in mind as well when we sort of work with our employees and take that responsibility. But then, having the right tools and systems in place and having the right set of data to use and report from is obviously really interesting for me as well, so that I can make the right decisions at the right time and drive the right type of performance.
Yep. Well, one of the things that we also hear from business leaders is longevity. It's not just being in the business for the next 2 years, but sustainability is really key. So that leads us to the final question, which is what can HR do in the long term to partner strategically with the business?
Hey, so that's a good question, right? And I think one of the things that I look for in particular in HR these days is just tenacity. That whole, like, first of all, you should be the subject matter experts you feel. You should be following trends. You should be pushing things to the forefront and making sure we talk about the right things, that we keep the agenda on sort of HR topics as well, and we keep afloat. So all of my leadership team are busy people having, their own domain to take care of. So we need somebody to come in also and call to action every now and then and say, look, here's where the business, all the other businesses are growing, but we're not there. What are we going to do? So pushing the right agenda and insisting on the people matters and making sure people don't drop the ball is one area. But then the other thing that I see quite a lot, and that sort of area of persistency, is there's a lot of people that I've met in my career that sort of come to me in HR, and they say, well, I tried a few times, but then I always got no, and it was that whole, the investment was deferred and it's very difficult. And that's, don't give up. Ensure that you've got that business case built, and ensure that your word becomes heard and your recommendations are sort of adhered to. So find a way to work within that business and truly be that business partner rather than sort of asking for nice new toys to play with because they save you work or things like this. So really ensure that you are partnering with business, understanding what business we are in, what type of situation the business is currently experiencing, and then make sure that you provide support for that business. So that would be it, I think, from my side.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, Ina, for sharing that. That reminds us of a Customer Connect session we had last year. And with regard to this topic, one of the things that the HR leader spoke about was expanding your influence across the organization. And that means to get to work with other stakeholders, right? That means besides working with the CEO, getting to understand the CFO, the CIO, and the rest of the other stakeholders within the organization. I think by doing so, you expand your reach, you expand your influence, and by doing so, I think it helps for a particular business case that you have to get approved. Indeed. Thanks, Ina. So for this final segment for today's session, we will end off by equipping you with a methodology that we highly advocate that has resulted in many successes. We call it Issues, Evidence, Impact, IEI in short. Now, before we go into the IEI methodology, we must understand that there are many facets to employee engagement, and it means different things to different businesses. The example that we ran through earlier in the Straits Times article expounds that some metrics for employee engagement are things like goal alignment, trust in leadership, career progression, and so on and so forth. Now, this example that we are about to go through is the result of low engagement, which is resulting, of course, high turnover. So then we go to Mr. CFO and we say, Mr. CFO, we need budget because our employee turnover is high. And we stop there. And then Mr. CFO asks us to show him and present him data, and that is often the endpoint of many HR requests. Well, after all, a CFO is a numbers guy, so we have to present numbers to him. We have to then go a step further, and that is to provide evidence, which is the second column. Now, with evidence, we have data in our arsenal to present everything that a CFO needs or wants to hear. Usually that data can be extracted from your payroll or your HR system, in this case, your people pay system. And of course, if you need to understand more, then do feel free to reach out to your respective account manager and you will get help from them. Now, another way you can gain evidence is by utilizing survey tools. So allow me to give you a snippet of how the Ascender Human Capital Management Survey tool works as an example. There are a few surveys you can use within the Ascender system, but what you can see on the screen are two examples. On the left, an engagement survey, and on the right, an alignment survey, which is one of the metrics we discussed previously that impacts employee engagement. Now, next, you can drill down into what factors that are causing employees to be disengaged or misaligned, where there are already many pre-designed sections and questions that you can utilize within the system itself based on our extensive research. You can even drill down into sections, individual responses, and in this example, you would see that under the section of empowerment, the score is rather low at 40% on the specific question on I am confident about my ability to do my job. So as a HR person, what you can do is to then click on that link, and then what the system will do is it will provide you a knowledge base of the issue and a suggested ways of remedies that can help you to improve in this area. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because we've seen many successful projects get approved because of survey tools. And with such tools, it gives the board or the management insights into the health status of the workforce. Now, coming back to REI, what we discussed previously was articulating the issue, the evidence, and of course, where survey tools can be one way. But we cannot stop there. Mr. CFO would then be asking, okay, now I get it. We have presented the issue, the evidence, but how does that impact me or impact the bottom line? And that is where impact comes, right? The high turnover at 41.8%, which is causing the business $3 million in costs per annum. Now, then many of you will be wondering where and how I get the calculations from. So thanks for asking that question. We will cover that in the next slide. Now, one more critical element to and on the impact is to say or to mention the impact if nothing is done. Now, this is often missed. We mention the impact of doing something, right? But we do not articulate the impact of doing nothing. So in this case, we can say, hey, Mr. CFO, if we carry on this way, we will be losing $3 million of costs per annum due to high employee turnover. Now, in the second example that you see is the example of early attrition, right? Which is a huge one. We covered that in the slide earlier about the S-curve. Now, we must understand that IEI essentially covers the why of what we need to be doing something about, right? But with the limited time, I wouldn't be able to cover everything that needs to be covered in a typical business case workshop that usually takes us about an hour or so. But just to let you know that at least if you present REI, it helps you at least to win half the battle because you have brought the why point home, right? So some other quick points I would like you to take note of when you build your business case, right? 4 points. Number one is what is the solution, right? So REI demonstrates the problem. So of course, on the other side is what the solution is, right? So you could be saying that, hey, Mr. CFO, by implementing the Ascender HCM system, it could be a remedy to this particular problem. Number two, what the cost of the solution is, right? Number three, what the projected return of investment is. So as an example, current turnover is at 41.8%. Mr. CFO, by implementing the Ascender system, we project that by 3 years from now, we would reduce turnover by 10%, as an example, right? Of course, you've got to get some numbers to support your justification. And the last point is other points that you would like to include in your business case are things like who needs to be involved, right? Like IT, your line managers, etc., and things like the duration of the project, how long it will take. Now, that's the part that we were talking about, the calculation on the cost of turnover. Now, we start by saying, of course, in this example that you see here, the turnover rate is at 30%. And in your typical justification, you would then say our turnover is at 30%, which is well over the industry average of 14%. Where do you get this from? You can get this from analyst reports, because I do understand that we have different representatives from different businesses and different industries, different regions. So of course, it's different across everywhere. So you, of course, have to get some numbers from several reports, right? But of course, now on the topic on calculation, in this case, 30% is well over the industry average of 14%. So the cost is computed this way, right? In our organization of 700 headcount, the 30% turnover per annum means 210 employees are leaving our organization every year. So if you pull data from your payroll and HR system, it shows us that the average annual salary package per employee is about 50K. And the average duration of an employee that stays with us is about 3 months that belongs to this category. So what you do is you then take 50K, which is the annual salary package, divided by 12 months in a year, times 3 months of duration that they stay within a year. And that presents you with 12.5K of wasted cost per employee. Again, to reiterate, we've just mentioned that this cost is cost that will never ever be recuperated. So then you take 12.5K times 210 employees per year. That's how you get a whopping 2.5 or rather $2.6 million of wasted cost of lost per annum. Usually at this stage, you have gotten the full attention of your CFO, right? And then that's where you come with a solution and say, hey, Mr. CFO, so therefore by implementing, as an example, the Ascender HCM system, we are looking to reduce turnover by 10%. So which means currently it's at 210 employees per annum. If we can reduce turnover by 10%, we will reduce the number to about 189 employees per annum. So if you do the same calculation, you can then say, therefore, we will be saving $262,000 per annum by implementing such a system. Now, a huge disclaimer here is that these costs do not include the cost of recruitment and training. Now, we all know as HR, the cost of recruitment and training is another huge ton of money. But if you follow me so far, what I am trying to say is the cost of turnover is really, really huge. Now, to just end off today's session, let us summarize 4 key learning points that we can take away. Number 1, data evidence is really key, right? We just can't go to Mr. CFO or the Mr. CEO and say our engagement level is low. We have to have data on hand. And I think one way to solve this is to be looking out for employee engagement survey tools that will help you to draw data, analyze that report, and to present those numbers and findings to your stakeholders. Number 2, to understand business issues, not just HR issues. What we covered earlier, to understand the broader issues and also understand the business strategy, not just the HR strategy or HR issues. On that topic, number 3 is to align those HR issues with the business strategy. We spoke a lot about alignment earlier. And number 4, to articulate the financial drivers of the issues and the benefits. We spoke about that in REI, which is the impact of not doing so and the current impact of that particular situation. With that, we've ended our current session of build how you can build a compelling business case to drive your employee engagement project. Ina, perhaps you would like to end off today's session?
Absolutely. Thank you, Donovan, for doing all the heavy lifting. And I hope everyone's found the session today useful. And we hope you had a good time as well. Look, if you need any further information, obviously you can always reach out through our website or the email address there. And of course, we have a Q&A as well to follow. So look forward to engaging with you with any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone.